Okay, I think everybody should be in. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to our Newfoundland and Labrador Marsh Watch. This is session 5 tonight, so we're at the halfway point, and we're going to have a lot of interesting species to talk about tonight. I am coming to you today from Mi'kma'ki, the land of the Mi'kmaq people, and we are going to be talking again about species of birds that are found all across Newfoundland and Labrador and elsewhere. But those are the lands of the Innu, Inuit, Mi'kmaq, and previously the Beothuk. And I'll just encourage everybody again who wants to learn more about what lands they are on to explore a bit more on nativeland.ca. For any folks who are new here this evening, my name is Jenna McDermott. I'll be your presenter this evening, and Catherine Dale, my colleague, is here as well. She's manning the chat. We both work for Birds Canada, which is a national nonprofit organization whose mission is to engage people through science to protect the birds we love. And we do have several programs across the country. So depending where you're located, there's probably a program that is good for you if you're interested in collecting data for birds, for science and for birds. Today, our agenda is pretty simple. We'll be talking about birds. That part will be recorded, and then we'll have a little quiz at the end, and I won't post the quiz part online, but the rest will be available as a recording on the website that you'll be able to see on the last page. We have a pretty eclectic collection of birds today that we're going through. We'll be going through some really true marsh birds, which aren't necessarily really common in the province, but are around a little bit and are good to know about, especially if you're traveling elsewhere. And then we have a few other random species, raptors. We're just throwing it all in here tonight, so it's going to be fun. Let's get started with our Canada goose. This is a pretty commonly known species, so I imagine several or all of you on the call are familiar with the Canada goose. It is the only goose species that we have in Newfoundland and Labrador, and it is, of course, a very large goose. So you'd have, a difficult time picking it up and carrying it around if you were into that sort of thing. Both males and females look the same plumage-wise, so you won't be able to tell those apart seeing them in the wild. Males are somewhat bigger and bulkier, but again, they don't have any difference in their plumages, so that could be difficult to tell. They both have a black head and neck and a black tail, and then in the middle, they're sort of mottled brown. The most important marker for them is that nice white chin strap that they have. And they can be a bit variable. You can see that photo on the bottom is like a pretty rare version of it, but usually they just have the classic chin strap there. And then they do also have a little white rear. Canada geese are pretty comfortable walking around on land. You can see they have those really strong looking legs, and they're also comfortable on the water. So they're using areas that are quite variable. They can be found in urban settings near water, also in more wild areas, wetlands, lakes, rivers, basically anywhere that has some open area with water as well as grazing opportunities nearby. And that can be in either treeless or treed areas. Canada geese will make a nest on the ground, on places like a muskrat hummock or a grassy area near the water. Canada goose make a pretty classic honking sound, so I'll play their regular honk for you. You can hear some red-winged blackbirds in the back as well there, but that's the Canada goose honk. If there's a whole group of them, they can have a lot of honking. And maybe that lots of honking there gave people a picture in their mind of, that classic V of Canada geese in flight, where they're all honking away while they're flying along. And it's really a sound that travels quite far, so you can often hear them when they are traveling in those large groups during migration. And you'll know that that's a Canada goose, a whole bunch of Canada geese flying around. So, as we've spoken about in the last several weeks, most birds throughout the breeding season will feed on insects, so that their chicks can, gain a lot of muscle mass and grow big. But Canada geese are one of the few who is grazing year round, so they're not really eating insects even when they're young. They're eating just grasses, sedges, other plants, berries, and seeds in the fall and winter, as well as in the fall and winter, you can see large groupings of Canada geese, big flocks on agricultural fields eating the leftover grain. Um, the chicks, as you can see up on the top right, are cute little fluff balls. Um, they are called precocial young, and so that just means that when they hatch out of the eggs, as soon as they're dry, they are pretty much ready to start running around. They're self-reliant and can start to feed themselves. But the parents do, of course, need to help them with thermoregulation for a little while until um, they've got more of their feathers. Um, You can see them in flight there on the top left. You can always pick out that classic chin strap. And this picture on the bottom left is just a family group that I came across in the summer in Newfoundland. That was in a large wetland complex of peatlands, and so they were on the marshy edges of some of the water bodies there. So in Newfoundland and Labrador, we do have them in these more wild spaces, whereas you can also get them in these park areas or urban areas like the picture on the bottom right. Canada geese are incredibly common across North America, and they do come in quite large flocks in more southern areas of their range, in those more urban areas. And so they do get a little bit of a nuisance label in many places, if they're pooping on people's lawns and golf courses and that sort of thing. In Newfoundland and Labrador, we do have smaller flocks, I would say, using areas that are more of natural spaces. So there's less of that human conflict. Um, and they use a lot of areas like ponds and peatlands or there's plenty along the coastal barrens that are west of the Long Range Mountains up in the Northern Peninsula, on the island specifically. Moving along to our herons, the American bittern is a sort of medium to large heron. It's a really cool bird, in several ways. You probably won't really get a very good look at them like you could see in these pictures. They are very good at camouflaging themselves, and they have this very cryptic coloration. But since we do have a good picture here that we can look at, you can see they have a sort of compact body, and they do have a long neck for, in relation to many other birds. Um, but it is not quite as long and lanky as many of the other heron species. And it does appear to be kind of a thicker sort of neck just from the way that it holds its feathers. Its legs are also quite long, compared to many birds, but compared to other herons, they're pretty short, and stocky. Um, the males and females look the same again, so they are both this streaky brown overall. In flight, they have dark flight feathers, which you could see in that picture in the middle, and they have this brown streaky coloration because they are found in mostly marshes, so any freshwater wetland that has a lot of emergent vegetation. So that's things like cattails and reeds, and rushes. And they are using that streaky brown coloration to blend in with the really vertical, dense vegetation where they're living. And so they will stand in one spot with their neck stretched up and their head, their bill tilted up to the sky, and they will just stand there and sway a little bit from side to side, um, pretending that they're some parts of grass and other vegetation. So they're really quite sneaky, and it's quite hard to be able to get a good look at one of them. So the better way to identify them or know there's one around is by listening to their vocalization. And they have this really interesting vocalization. Um, to me, it sounds a little bit like if you have a half-filled water bottle and you're sort of tipping it over and over itself. I'll let you listen to it. So it's a very interesting sound for a bird. It's not what you would expect to hear. Um, and it does travel quite well across the water because it's such a low frequency. And so you can hear this across any large wetland if there's a American bittern around. I'll play it once more for you because it's pretty fun. So American bitterns do make that noise in the dawn, but they sort of stop making it earlier in the morning. They're not like most breeding songbirds where they sing throughout the morning. They stop that pretty early, but then they all start singing that or making that call again at dusk as well. So marsh birds are often making their sounds more a little bit earlier in the day and also in the evening. You can also see in the picture where the American bittern is flying that it has its neck tucked back in. So when it's flying, it brings its long neck in an S shape so that it's tucked against the body. And that's different from things like sandhill cranes, which leave their neck stretched out when they're flying. Here's just a few other pictures of the bittern. When they have on their fancy breeding plumage feathers, so they do grow some fancy plumes out of their back during breeding season. Again, it's very difficult to see a bittern, so it's very unlikely you'll be able to see that. But if you do, it'd be really cool. And then at the bottom left there, that's just a picture of the bittern pretending to be a piece of vegetation, and it's still looking at you because they can move their eyes around in their sockets so they can have their head fully faced up to the sky, but still be looking around in front of them. American bitterns are ambush predators, so they're taking things like insects, amphibians, small fish, small mammals, and crayfish, nothing too big. And they're going to be slowly walking along the water, wading through the shallow water, swaying as they go. And when they find something to eat, they'll very quickly jab their bills down into the water and grab it. American bitterns will nest both in the wetlands but also in grasslands beside it because they obviously don't want their nests to flood, so they have to find a little bit of dry area. The American bittern is found across much of Canada and the United States. In Newfoundland, they are mostly found across the island, and they can be a little spotty across Labrador. And so we do have them in the province, but in quite low numbers compared to if we're looking on the mainland and farther south. Our next species is the great blue heron. In comparison to the American bittern, which we just saw, it's a very large heron. It stands several feet tall and has really long and lanky, very dignified proportions. So you can see it has this really large yellow and black bill, and that's sort of a classic heron bill, multi-purpose, well, not really multi-purpose, I guess, but a very sturdy bill that is used for, grasping and stabbing at prey. They have a really long, slender neck, very long legs. And then again, you can see that flight photo at the bottom. They tuck their neck back in an S shape towards their body when they're flying, so it's nice and tucked in there. The males and females look the same, just the immatures look a little bit different. So they're blue-gray overall. They can have a little bit of a pinkish hue to the neck. The adults have a bold black stripe behind the eye that you can see on those left-hand pictures really well. And then in the young birds, um, their crown is black or gray. So that picture on the top right, you can see that. Whereas on the adults, you'll have a middle stripe that's white. And depending on the angle you're looking at the heron, you might not be able to see that stripe very well, but it is there. You can also see from certain angles that their throat and belly is white and it has dark streaks on it. Again, from the side, that's obviously hard to tell, but from the front, you'll be able to get a look at that. And then again, in the breeding season, they grow these fancy ornamental plumes on their head, their back, and their breast. And so you can see some of the head plumes on the bottom flying bird, and some of the breast plumes on the top left bird as well. And so they're just looking fancy for breeding season, and then they'll lose those really ornamental feathers in the fall. The great blue heron is one of the most common herons that you see across much of North America. And they are found at the water's edge in a wide variety of habitats. So they're hunting for oftentimes fish, but basically they'll eat anything they can catch, like amphibians, invertebrates, reptiles, mammals, other birds. They're really going for whatever they can get that big bill on. They're another ambush predator, and so you'll often see them wading along the edges of the water or along the shoreline. And oftentimes, if they are in an area where there's some prey that they think they can catch, they will stand still for several minutes at a time, like this picture on the bottom left, and they will just be staring intently into the water, just staring, 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 until suddenly they'll snap their bill down into the water in a big burst of movement, and grab whatever it is they were going after, and then usually swallow it whole. Great blue herons are a little bit crazy, I think, because I can't imagine this long-legged, long-bodied bird standing in a tree, but they do actually nest in the trees and in colonies. Um, and the colonies are called rookeries. They can nest in single pairs, but more often you'll find a group of nests together in a colony. And these nesting colonies can be found up to 6 kilometers or sometimes more away from where they're going to forage along the edge of the water. So they're not necessarily found in wet places, they're found in a forested area. They do prefer islands or colonies in swamps because they can reduce predation from ground predators by being standing in water. However, you can find them also not in those wet places as well. Mostly, the great blue heron is silent when you're finding it out foraging throughout the day. But if you're near a colony or if it is surprised, it will make sort of a croak or a squawk that sounds much like this. And so that's not really a very distinctive sound. It's more of like a noise that you'll probably hear it being loud, making this croaking noise, and you'll look up and be like, oh, what was that weird noise? And then you'll see that there's a heron flying by, for example. And so it's not really a great identification cue, but they do make those noises on occasion. Great blue herons have a wide distribution and they are resident across much of the states. As far as I know, they're not found in Labrador, but they are reliably now in southwestern Newfoundland, and they have been seen more um, across more of the island each year as well. So they are spreading a little bit, and we're definitely at the north end of their range in the province. So next we'll move on to two species of rails, the rail family. And rails are very wetland dependent birds. They're generally laterally compressed, which means that if you look at them straight on, they're sort of squished skinny. And that's to help them walk in between this tall emergent vegetation. They typically have short wings, so they prefer to walk rather than fly. But many species do still go on long migrations. It's just easier for them to get blown off course because they're not super strong flyers necessarily. So this is the Virginia rail, one of the rail species. I will preface this species account by saying they're not really found very much in Newfoundland and Labrador. There's only some historical records, but who knows what will happen with climate change. And if you're somewhere on the mainland in the south outside of Labrador, you might come across them. So we'll cover them anyway this evening. And so this is a medium-sized rail. They're incredibly hard to get a look at. I've never seen a Virginia rail, and I think many folks who've been birding for a long time also have never caught a glimpse of one before. And that's because they are really unlikely to come out in the open. They're very sneaky and secretive. Um, However, if you did get a look at them, like this person who managed to grab this picture, you'll see that they have this long, drooping red bill. They have a short upturned tail. It's so short you can almost not even tell that it's a tail under there. And both males and females look the same. They have a gray face, which stands out in comparison to the warm brown hues of the rest of their body. They also have black and white streaked flanks and some black streaking on the back as well. The Virginia rail is is basically always walking around in the marshes. So they are wandering around between the vegetation and foraging as they go. They, as I said, are very unlikely to be seen. So if you come across a Virginia rail, you're more likely going to hear it than see it. And so I'll play their two main calls for you. This one can be described as ticket, and they make this sound over and over again, and they can go on for quite a long time. It's not super loud, so it can blend in a little bit with the background or sound maybe a bit like an insect, but it is obviously coming from this wetland area, so you know that it is the Virginia rail. So here's what the ticket sound is. So there's a lot of spring peepers also calling in the background, the higher noise, but this is the sort of staccato note that is playing. So they do that call, and then also as a pair, two of them together will do this sort of squeaky grunting call as well. I think it sounds a little bit like a bunch of dogs going after a bunch of squeaky toys. Someone else has described it as like a little pig going through the marsh. You might hear something different, but this is what the grunting noise is. Um, yeah, it's pretty crazy. So these birds, much like the American bittern that we spoke of, they're active in the dawn and just before the dawn, but after sunrise, they're really going to stop calling 1 or 2 hours sort of after sunrise. So they're a very early morning caller, but then again, they will start to call again in the evening before dusk and after dusk. And sometimes will also call through the night. So another reason to go check out your marshes in the nighttime. The Virginia rail is sort of probing and pecking away at things. So things with long bills like that, like a lot of our shorebirds as well, use them to probe into the mud to collect insects and larvae that are underneath the mud. So they're eating things like snails and slugs, many different types of insects, spiders, earthworms, amphipods, amphibians, and they'll also eat some seeds as well. As you can see in the photo on the top, especially even when it's walking through the vegetation, that really pale gray face really stands out, as well as the bright red bill, because the rest of the body will sort of blend in with the vegetation. As I mentioned, the Virginia rail is not really known to be breeding in Newfoundland and Labrador. There are some historical records, so there could be visitors again sometime, but they are found widely across Canada and the United States. So if you are headed out of the province or live out of the province, you might come across them in your marshes nearby as well. Our next rail species is the Sora. The Sora is smaller than the Virginia rail. He's a pretty small little guy. Um, Rails, so the Sora and rails generally are kind of grouse and chicken-like, so they are walking around most of the time, as I mentioned. If you see them head on, they will look slender, but from the side, they're looking kind of wide. Um, not like a chicken, which is wide from every direction. And for the Sora, the most important marker is this bright yellow bill. The males and the females look the same again. So they both have that bright yellow bill. It's almost like really bright yellow candy corn or something popping out. And it stands out really well, especially against their black mask and throat that they have on their face. The rest of their um, head, neck, and sort of underbody are kind of this gray, blue-gray. But then on their back, they're mottled brown and black. And then they have a white underside of their tail, which is often upturned as well. And that white will stand out again in the dense vegetation where they're moving around and foraging, as well as that yellow bill. So those are going to be two good marks to look for on a Sora. The Sora is also sort of secretive and sneaky, but they're a little bit more likely to pop out now and again. So you might get a look at them if you're in, again, a marshy area. These rail species are really very marshland obligates because they really love a lot of that emergent vegetation being around. However, even though you could potentially get a look at a Sora, you are more often likely going to hear them than see them. And they make a couple of really interesting noises. The first one is this whinny call. So it starts off really excited and then sort of peters out and slows down at the end there. And Soras are sort of easily startled or territorial because even if you do something like slam your car door by the edge of a marsh and a Sora is there, they will respond with that whinny call in surprise or out of territorial calling. They can also make this purr weep noise. And both the whinny and that purr weep noise can be heard from quite a large distance. So even if it's on the other side of the marsh, you'll still likely hear the Sora. Soras are more of picking kind of birds, so they're just going around in the wetland picking at food to eat. So they're eating things like aquatic plant seeds, duckweed and pondweed, which is floating vegetation on top of the water, as well as insect larvae, as well as insect adults, and things like snails as well. They are, of course, sort of navigating through these really muddy, potentially sinking ground areas, and they've adapted, along with many of the other rail species, these really crazy long toes that you can see in the top right photo there. That act to spread their weight out across a larger area, and it kind of makes their foot act a bit like a snowshoe would for us in snow. And it's actually so effective, these long toes, that they can walk on things like lily pads and almost seem to be walking on top of water. Their toes are so long that they're actually about as long as their whole lower leg bone, so it's pretty crazy. You can see that photo on the bottom right is a Sora nest. They do lay quite a lot of eggs, and they will also lay eggs in the nest of other Soras rather than only their own. I guess to ensure that some will survive even if theirs don't. And a lot of different waterfowl actually do this where they lay eggs in other individuals' nests. Many of the ducks do it as well. You can see that in that nest, there's sort of a browner colored egg in the front, sort of at the bottom right. And that's because typically one female will lay a eggs of all the same color. And so that brown egg at the front is most likely from a different individual than the one who laid the rest in that nest. Soras are widespread across North America, and they are far more common out west than they are in eastern Canada. And in Newfoundland and Labrador, they are not really common at all, but we do have a couple of Soras that are quite reliably around the St. John's area in Newfoundland. And then there also have been some sightings across the years through Labrador, um, near Happy Valley, Goose Bay, and Lab City, and also across other areas of the island in Newfoundland as well. But they are not super common and would be quite exciting to find in the province. Moving away from our marsh obligate species, we are going to talk about the willow ptarmigan now, one of my favorites. Um, the willow ptarmigan is a large grouse. So again, this is really a very chicken-like bird. They are spending most of their time walking on the ground, and they have a sort of awkward, heavy flight, even though they can fly, but it's very lumbering. They have feathered feet, which is really cute. You can see it really well on the top and bottom right photos there. And they have those also to use sort of like snowshoes because they do stick around throughout the year. And so they have to, of course, deal with the snow in the winter. Apart from being chicken-like, they also have a short, stout bill, which is also much like a chicken. And the pictures here are of male willow ptarmigan in breeding plumage. There is a female that's sort of in the background of that bottom left photo, but the rest are males. And they have a warm chestnut colored neck and head with a kind of really has a reddish hue to it. They have a variable amount of mottled brown on their back and their tail. And because they are fully white in the winter, which we'll see in a couple of slides from now, during the spring when they start molting their feathers, they do it in a sort of gradual manner so that it's not all at once. And so as the snow is melting, so are they putting on more brown feathers. So they're always really camouflaged with their surroundings. And so throughout the spring and summer, you can get males that have quite a variable amount of white on them still. But they do always have a little bit of a white belly, even in the midst of the summer. And then they also have a little red eyebrow, which is quite variable between individuals and through the time of year. The male willow ptarmigan is one of the only male grouse who is actually present throughout the chick rearing period. So he'll actually stay with the family until the chicks are independent, which is unusual for a lot of our grouse. This here is the female. As you can see on the picture on the right, she is a master camouflage. Um, they really blend in super well with the vegetation, dried grasses, things like that, that are in the ground where they're hiding. And you're basically going to step on her before she starts moving. So it can be quite startling to come across a willow ptarmigan because you won't see her until she pops up. Generally, she's sort of this mottled brown, black, and white, which is what makes her so good at being camouflaged. And she does have a white belly, which you can't see in that picture. You can also see she has a bit of a red eyebrow. Again, that's quite variable between individuals, and so you won't necessarily see that. The best way to be able to tell a willow ptarmigan is because of this crazy noise that they make. Honestly, it's just the funniest noise. We had the pleasure this past summer of camping in a pretty remote area and just listening to a couple of willow ptarmigans making that noise from either side of the tent for several minutes in the evening, and it was really hilarious. Oh, we're listening again. Wonderful. This is the Willow Ptarmigan in non-breeding plumage. So over the winter time, you can really see its feathered feet there as it stands on that tree. Both the males and the females do turn snow white during the winter. That's so that they can blend in with their snowy surroundings. They do have a little black tail tip that's a bit difficult to tell in that picture, and some black on the wings as well that you can see when they're flying. Um, They also survive the winter since they're living in these really harsh, windy conditions, by excavating snow burrows. So they'll hide under the snow to take shelter from the elements as well. Willow ptarmigan are mostly herbivorous. They feed by walking around and eating low-lying vegetation, so um, they're quite reliant on willow and dwarf birch in these open areas, and they can also jump up and snack on vegetation if they can't reach it from walking. And so they'll snip the ends off of twigs and take off the buds or berries and seeds with the edge of their bill, which is quite sharp. They will eat berries whole, so they'll just throw it back. And then they also can eat some insects, but that's a really small amount of their diet, basically just of the chicks as well. Otherwise, they're eating plant material year round. Um, they do eat snow in the winter. I can't remember if I said that just now or not, which is pretty unusual for a lot of bird species. Again, we have young here at the bottom, the super cute little chick. They are precocial, which means again that they are pretty well ready to go once they've hatched. They can feed themselves and walk around, but they will get keep warm under their parents' feathers when it's cold outside until they can thermoregulate themselves. The family group does stay together, as I mentioned, and the female is fiercely protective. So this is a video of a female willow ptarmigan that I came across. The male totally flew away and made that crazy bow noise. And then I kept walking, and this female flushed up, and I just heard all these little babies scattering around. I never saw them at all. And then this female basically started running along my feet. There's no noise because it's just wind. But she just ran in circles around me until I until I left. But she wasn't scared of me at all. She just wanted me to get away from her chicks, which were hiding in the grasses that I couldn't see. So the willow ptarmigan are using tundra areas or open, moderately moist areas where there's a lot of short willows or dwarf birches. A lot of the time, these are fens. And then in the winter, they'll move into sheltered valleys to sort of overwinter and stay warmer. Willow ptarmigan do have a global range. They are primarily Arctic tundra birds, but they are found obviously in openings in the boreal forest, and this is sort of a look more at North America, and they are found throughout the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, as well as the more northern areas of Canada and Alaska. Just to throw a wrench into things, there's another very similar looking species called the rock ptarmigan that we also have in the province. Um, they do use somewhat different habitats. So willow ptarmigan are really in these shrubby open areas, whereas rock ptarmigan are very much at the the most inhospitable areas that are quite rocky, which is like their name, luckily. So habitat can help you tell them apart. And they do look a little bit different as well. The willow ptarmigan is there on the left. We have the males here. The willow ptarmigan has that really reddish brown head and neck, whereas the rock ptarmigan is a far more gray colored brown. It's far more subdued. So there is that difference in color. During the wintertime, they are both totally white, but the male willow ptarmigan do not have any black between their eye and their bill, whereas the rock ptarmigan have a line that goes from the eye to the bill that is black as well. The females are honestly really quite difficult to tell apart. I don't even have pictures of them to compare here. Um, the the Willow Ptarmigan female is a little bit of a warmer color brown, whereas the Rock Ptarmigan is sort of that colder, grayer brown. Um, but a lot of the time, habitat's really going to help you tell the difference if you come across them, and as well as their vocalizations, because they often will vocalize if they're startled and flying away. And so you'll know the Willow Ptarmigan by that crazy bow 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 sound. Okay, moving on now away from our chicken-like birds, and now we'll go into our two raptor species for the evening. So this is the Northern Harrier. The male is on the slide here. Harriers are sort of a medium-sized raptor, and they're a long, pretty long and slender bird generally. So they have a quite a long tail and long, thin wings as well. They do have bands along their tail, and you can see it a little bit in these photos. They have a facial disc that's similar to owls, so it's just this ring of feathers around the face, and it sort of makes them have a bit of a flattened face look. They hold their wings in a dihedral, which is a fancy way of saying they hold them up in a V, basically all the time while they're flying. You can see that in the picture on the left, bottom left there. And the most important cue for the Northern Harrier is this very distinct white rump that you can see when they're flying. So you can see it on that top bird, and it's only from the top of their body you could see that. And because Northern Harriers are sort of flying over open flatlands, they're flying low to the ground. You often see them from the top, from their back, and so you'll get a look at that white tail, white rump feathers when they're banking or turning a corner, that sort of thing. So it's a great mark, and one you'll often be able to get a look at. The male here on this page is called the gray ghost a lot of the time by birders, and that's because he's sort of this very pale, ghostly gray color. Underneath he's totally white, but he does have black wingtips as well as a black trailing edge of the wing, sort of bordering the back of the wing there. This here is the female. She has the same, of course, general size and shape. Female raptors are often larger than males, but that's hard to tell, of course, from a distance. But as you can see, she is totally different color. She's brown, sort of mottled brown along the back. She has that really great mark of the white rump again in flight. So that's something you can see in all of the Northern Harriers as they're flying. Underneath, the female is sort of she has barring on her belly and flanks. The picture at the bottom left there, I think is actually a juvenile bird, which looks very similar to females, but they have a very orange cast to their undersides. And so the female would be more of a brown with streaks going down. You could see also the facial disc on these birds here that makes them look a little bit like owls. And you can tell that she has a dark head, which contrasts to the lighter underparts. For that juvenile on the bottom, as well as the females would have the same. So because they do have that sort of owl-like facial disc, that helps them to, oh, you can see it really well in that picture on the bottom left there. That helps funnel the sound into their ears. So they do hunt auditorially as they're flying, as well as visually, a combination of the two. And so they're really flying low over these open grasslands or wetlands, and listening and looking for things like small mammals and even sometimes birds to catch. They have a really cool ability to hover in flight. So the bird on the top there is hovering. They can hover in one spot as they sort of survey the area underneath to see if they want to leap down and catch their prey with their feet first. They do nest on the ground in grassy areas and wetlands, and so they're basically found always in these open areas. I just discovered that the Northern Harrier's range maps are not including Newfoundland or Labrador in most of the resources that I've looked at, but they are on the range map in the Sibley's second edition, but all of the resources online have it incorrectly where they are not present there. They are found across North America. They're breeding quite high in the north, and they are found all over the island of Newfoundland as well as the southeast, especially of Labrador. So just always be careful of your range maps. On to our final bird of the evening, the short-eared owl. This is a sort of medium-sized owl. It has a very round head and short ear tufts, much like its name says. However, those short ear tufts are often hidden or difficult to see at a distance, so it's really not a great mark to be able to tell what you're looking at. They do have a very short tail, which you can see in the flying picture there on the left. That's a really good thing to look for. And they have a pale facial disc, which is quite evident in that flying photo as well. And that's, of course, used with the feather. The feathers are made in that way in order, again, to funnel sound into their ears as they're flying and hunting. Both the males and females look the same. They're this buffy, straw and brown colored streaky bird. The female is generally darker or has darker streaks. And you'll notice that, well, I guess you can't really see super well in these photos, but the back is generally darker and the front is paler or white on the belly with less streaking on the front. The best mark for the short-eared owl when they're perched and you're getting a good look at them is those yellow eyes with the big dark smudges around them. The dark smudges is almost like if a 90s grunge person put on their makeup and they didn't take it off, and then you have this big black shadows around the eyes. When they are in flight, it's a really great time to identify them because they have, again, that short tail, the really sort of flat face because of their facial disc, but then also on the underwing, they have two dark marks under the wing near the wrist area, so where the feathers will bend or where the wing will bend into the primary feathers, and then another halfway down the feather. Like the Harrier that we saw earlier, they are generally cruising over these low open lands, so areas like fields or peatlands or tundra, and hunting as they go. And their wing beats are very buoyant, soft, kind of floppy. They're really a pleasure to watch as they fly. You can see one off in the distance there in that larger picture on the right. So they are both foraging in these open habitats, and they are nesting on the ground in these grassy areas and wetlands as well. And you can see a little nest with some nestlings on the left there. And they're looking in these areas for small mammals to eat. So they're not eating birds, they're just eating small mammals like foals. And because of their habitat and how they look, they are also sometimes called the grass owl. Again, like the Harrier, they also have the unusual ability to hover while they're hunting, and they will forage both by day and night. So you can see these out in the daytime, which is really cool, since it's often hard to get a look at owls. Short-eared owls aren't especially vocal. Their primary song, which is a series of a dozen or so hoots, is often given by the males during a courtship flight, either from the ground or from an elevated perch as well. And so they make this hooting sound. But again, that's pretty uncommon to be able to hear. So it's not going to be the best mark for you to be able to know that there's a short-eared owl around. Mostly it's visual. And then both males and females will make these sort of screams or bark noises when they're defending their nest and offspring. And a lot of owls make similar kind of screaming or barking noises as well. And this is what the short-eared owl sounds like. But again, best thing is to be able to get a good look at them while they're flying. The short-eared owl is a species at risk. It's listed nationally as special concern as of 2012, and then provincially in Newfoundland and Labrador, they're listed as vulnerable. That is due to several reasons, one of which is habitat loss, which is often an issue for birds, of course, where we have encroaching human development, that sort of thing. Short-eared owls do need these really large areas of open lands, and so a lot of the time things like coastal development can interfere with having those large swaths of land. And as climate changes, we're also seeing more shrubs growing farther north, and so that can make it much more difficult for them when they're hunting. And so this shrubification can also be a problem for short-eared owls. Um, Predation of eggs and juveniles can also be an issue because they are nesting on the ground. Um, some other some other things are food availability and competition, since they are using, these similar areas to other species. If you want to help monitor short-eared owls in Newfoundland and Labrador, we do have a pretty new program where all you need to do is drive I think it's 10-kilometer route twice a year in order to see where you see them. And so you can look at that website down the bottom, naturecounts.ca/NC/NL and you can take a look at if there's a route near you that is available to adopt to be able to monitor those. Short-eared owls are another species with a global range. In North America, they do migrate, but they are breeding up pretty high north in the tundra because that's a great area for them in the open lands. And we do find them across Newfoundland and Labrador, especially in our coastal areas and in our peatlands. We'll just do a quick comparison of the northern harrier versus the short-eared owl, because as you might have noticed, they do have a lot of similarities. They are both found in similar habitats in these wide open grasslands and peatlands or tundra areas. And they fly with these buoyant flights, cruising low along the ground, sort of following the rise and fall of the land to hunt. And they both can do that hovering flight. So there's a lot of similarities, but luckily they do have some really key points that can help you tell them apart. So the northern harrier on the left always will show that white rump on both males and females, as well as the immatures. And if you look to the short-eared owl on the right there, you'll see there's no white rump at all. They just have that same mottled brown all the way down the back. If you see them from underneath when they're flying, you should take a look at the males versus the short-eared owl specifically, because the females are going to look brown underneath, whereas the male northern harrier and the short-eared owls are both white underneath. But the northern harrier has black wingtips and the black along the back edge of the wing, whereas the short-eared owl doesn't have black along the edge of the wing, and it does have dark wingtips, but it also has those two sort of dark wrist marks as well. So they have these really nice identifying features to tell them apart. Short-eared owls also have a very short tail, whereas northern harriers have quite a long tail comparatively. So thank you, everyone. That's the end of this evening's webinar. Thanks for coming out again tonight to learn about this whole collection of random birds. Next week, we'll be talking about shorebirds. I would just like to thank Wildlife Habitat Canada for providing the funding through the sale of the Canadian Wildlife Habitat Conservation Stamp, or Duck Stamp. That's a really hard acronym to say. For providing funding for these webinars. Feel free to ask any questions if you have any. Our emails are up at the top there, and the recordings are available on the website just underneath there as well. Feel free also to follow Birds Canada on social media.